Someone must run something or nothing will run. My response, everyone has an input because they understand how it works and can productively contribute. It is the same way we do it today in a microcosmic way. Do we ring up Joe Bloggs from Manchester, who has no knowledge on the subject, for his opinion about how complex heart surgery is done? No. Machines already run certain microcosmic elements of our processes of industry and infrastructure right now, with no human being needed to run it. And her response, of course we don't. But what about considering whether to retaliate if another country or group with different ideas tries to take over? Who does that? I don't want a say in how the Large Hadron Collider works. An example of machines running things? And my response, okay, first off, you have just contradicted yourself in saying that someone has to run things. Now you've just agreed that we don't. And I'm sorry, take over? You're stuck within this current paradigm of thinking. You need to stop thinking about this in terms of the current system of economics and values. This is the first step to understanding an RBE. You need to think beyond the pale a little, as it were, and not apply the current parameters to it, because the current parameters will not be present. Her response, no, I don't. You need to start thinking about how you might get from where we are now to where you want to go, because it won't get there without having to answer these questions. And my response, okay, what would be the benefit of anyone taking over Wikipedia? The people who currently run Wikipedia, what would be the reward for taking it over? Before you think about a certain action, you need to think about the reward which motivates, incentivizes, and perpetuates the performance of such actions. And her response, well, if I were to attempt a takeover, it would mean that I could perhaps put my ideas over without people knowing that they were just ideas, so I could subtly change a lot of articles. I could start charging for advertising around it and claim some of the money for myself. The people who run Wikipedia don't do this, but that doesn't mean that no one else might want to. And my response, no. Before you say what if there were, you need to think about what the reward would be. And her response, any area has a certain amount of resources. If we're talking world-wise, those resources includes the people in it, unless you have counted and considered that there might be someone who wants power over those resources and people. You haven't thought things through. The reward is power. I don't think you understand the political reality of how things work at the moment well enough to propose a new idea. And my response, and how do you suggest that they could take any alteration in the allocation of said resources when there is an intelligent cybernetic system with multiple levels of redundancy managing the allocation of said resources? In a world with no monetary rewards and where hostile, self-interested and greedy behaviors are looked upon as socially offensive, what would be the reward for that taking over be? And her response, the key here is in a world. And if you're proposing to change the world over, you need to know how that will work, because it won't. You will always get people who don't agree with how things are being done, and if you have the ability to change the world, maybe they have the ability to change it too. Do you not underestimate the human capacity for greed and power? As an example, you're arguing with me now because you want me to agree with your ideas. That's fine, but do you even think if your ideal TZM world should come to exist that there won't be people with other ideas? People with other very powerful, very persuasive ideas? And my response, and I notice that you are now avoiding the question. And an RBE is not ideal. I completely acknowledge that there are other ideas. However, can you think of a more optimal and humane orientation than the scientific method applied for social environment and environmental concern? I certainly can't. Response, I've answered the question. The reward is power. Do you think Mugabe cares about how he is perceived, how his actions are thought of? Do you think Mengistu cared what the world or his people or society thought about his actions? No, an RBE is not ideal, even though you earlier said it was, but the attempt to implement one is idealistic. And my response, as Captain Picard once asked, power to do what? And her response, it's utopian. Power to do whatever they damn well like. And my response, do you even know what utopia refers to? And her response, oh, I give up. And my response, and you haven't even acknowledged that such a takeover would be instantly detected by the system and blocked. And her response, in capital letters, how? With 3 question marks. Of course I bloody know what utopia means. And my response, are you even familiar with how AI tracks and stops someone from accessing certain elements of a system? And her response, if you're going to resort to trying to belittle me and suggest that I don't have references for my arguments, you're going to find you're very wrong. And my response, then tell me what utopia means. And her response, and who programs it to do that? And my response, algorithms already exist for this same thing. If they didn't, we wouldn't be able to electronically manage inventories. It's all a matter of putting together what we already have. And her response, a utopia is a perfect socio-political model. So any political theory that is proposing that its result will be this is utopian. Thus TZM is utopian. And my response, and this is a utopia, and is this utopia possible in an emergent universe? And her response, but who controls it? Who decides what is acceptable behavior and what isn't? And as for the emergent universe, no, I don't think so. My response, and is an RBE not emergent also? And it's not a question of who, it's a question of how. And her response, but the socio-political reality it's emerging into has to be taken into consideration. No, the question is who. Someone has to set the parameters. Are you going to do that? Am I? Are we going to have to vote on it? Who decides which technology is used and what it is used for? And my response, as I said earlier, you're stuck in the current thinking paradigm. It's understandable why you can't see past it, because we've always had human beings in positions of power and or authority, so it's difficult to see past the need for them. Does the human nervous system vote on what to do about an injury? No. It just does what is optimal and necessary. Same thing here. When the calculator was first distributed, were there any people asking, but who decides what the calculator should arrive at? No. You can either get frustrated that I'm not bowing to your perceived authority on this matter, or you can think about whether what you've held true is still valid. But don't get frustrated with me. It's the information you disagree with, not me. So deal with just the information. If you have read much of the material, then you won't need to be asking the same questions you're still asking. Whenever you say something like, oh, for heaven's sake, what is that saying about your position? Are you considering this like a debate that one of us has to win and the other one has to lose? Where's the learning? Where's the humbleness to data? That's why I don't get frustrated when discussing this, because I don't treat it like a parent who knows best and is trying to educate a petulant child. I urge you to treat me as the adult that I am. And her response, I say for heaven's sake generally because you haven't understood what I've said, or because you've used something I've said to try to lecture me. I am treating you as an adult, but you speak to people as though they are wholly uneducated. They have no rights of their own to their own views and do not understand you, and I won't tolerate that from anyone. As I said, I have a degree and a master's, and am working towards a PhD in political philosophy. So don't imagine I don't know what I'm talking about. And I have read the material, I just don't find satisfactory answers in it. So I'm still asking the questions. If you can't answer them, then I'm sorry. And my response, no one has a right to an opinion. If I have claimed a right to my opinion that you should die, for example, would that have to be respected? Of course not. I'm sorry, but politics is not what we're talking about here. Understanding me is irrelevant and not required. It's not me that's important, it's the information. And her response, everyone has a right to a view and an opinion. We are individuals, and I believe we have rights. Whether those rights are upheld is another matter. You are perfectly entitled to the opinion that I should die. It's an entirely different matter whether you have the right to have that opinion acted on. Not politics, political philosophy, which is exactly what we're talking about. And my response, because the thing is, you speak as though you are the authority merely for your credentials. And that is unacceptable. Credentialed people have been wrong all through history. A degree doesn't make you an authority. And her response, no, I speak as though I am an intelligent human being who has a lot of information and experience, and therefore my opinions are worth listening to. So who is an authority? Who are you to argue about Marx when you don't understand it? And my response, worth listening to? Yes. Empirically right? That isn't for either of us to judge. No one is an authority. The only authority is the empirical laws of nature, which we are always developing a better and better understanding of. And you know what? Those empirical laws of nature, that is what an RBE is aligned with. That is what you don't understand. And her response, you're talking political theory. There is no way of testing whether TZM will work. Therefore, it's a theory, and an untested one at that. Nothing empirical about it. I happen to believe it won't work. That's my opinion, based on my experience, knowledge, and studying. You happen to believe it will. And my response, okay, first off, you're confusing the word theory with the word guess. A theory is in fact the highest position of data held by science. And who are you to say I don't understand Marx's theory? Because my study of Marx's doctrine resides outside of academia? Since you feel justified in saying that, I think I can say that you don't understand what TZM advocates. Or am I not authorized to say that? I'm not talking political theory. I'm talking technical reality. Politics is not a science. And her response, there's no right or wrong here, but I'm telling you that political philosophy of any kind does not work like science. History has taught us that. If you think it will, then I believe you are misguided. And my response, well, we're definitely in agreement there. Political philosophy really isn't science. That's why political philosophy is obsolete, and that is why an RBE does not entail any form of currently known politics. Keep in mind that TZM is just a movement. It needs no testing, because it already exists. And her response, I don't think you understand Marxism or the elements of it I've been discussing, because your remarks have indicated that you don't understand. So where is TZM working? My response, TZM has been working for the last 3 years. This conversation, by the way, listeners, was about a year or so ago. Which are you referring to? Are you mistaking TZM for an RBE? And her response, I'm referring to the ideas that you're advocating. I don't care what the ideas are. I'm just suggesting that as a system does not exist yet. In any large-scale society, it is untested. And my response, if you don't care what the ideas are, then how can you expect to understand them enough to analyze their effectiveness or logic? So you're saying you don't care about the scientific method? I would love to see how you can live your life without it. Are you realizing yet that the current values and methods do not apply in an RBE, just like the values and methods of the Neolithic times do not apply to modern capitalism? If it's the ideas I am advocating, then you are referring to an RBE, not TZM. And her response, the values and methods of Neolithic times have led to modern capitalism. If you ignore history and ignore the society you're trying to evolve into, you are doomed to fail. If you try to do this in one area and ignore the rest of the world, you are doomed to fail. Okay, if you're going to be pedantic about it, as far as I'm concerned, it's irrelevant whether I refer to TZM or an RBE, because you know what I'm referring to.